There's a reason why I put her in here. Some individuals who display symptoms of abnormal behavior may deny any subjective distress. For example, if they're in the manic state, they think that's normal. Or if they have antisocial personality disorder. I don't know if you've ever talked to these people. They think there's something wrong with you,
Yeah.
not with them. They think they're perfectly fine. There's a reason why I put Britney Spears' picture up here. I don't know if you remember when Britney shaved her head. I think she shaved half of it first, and then she shaved the other half. This is right after she left her husband and her boys. And nobody was exactly sure what was going on with Britney. And then she shaved her head, which is normal behavior, right? It's not manic at all. And so the news agency started a watch to see what Britney was going to do next. I think she got a tattoo on her scalp, if I'm not mistaken, but I don't remember. Britney Spears has never been that important to me. However, now she's on one of the television shows, Idol, something about an idol. Singing with the Stars, I don't know. She's on some strange television show. Anyway, okay. If people kept trying to rationalize why Britney was doing these things. Why in the world is she shaving her head? That's not normal. She's got this lovely blonde hair. She's the icon. All the boys are just madly in love with her. They've been madly in love with her ever since she made that one video about being a Catholic schoolgirl. Remember that video? Something about hit me one more time or something. Remember? Okay. Oh, all right. It's on my playlist, okay? Well, I've seen the video. She dances in that video. And she doesn't wear a lot of clothes. Okay. But she was in Pepsi commercials. Remember the Pepsi commercials? Don't tell me you're so young that you don't remember Britney Spears. Do you remember Pink? In the Pepsi commercials? You remember Pink and you don't remember Britney Spears?
No, we do.
Okay. I was the only one obsessing over yellowheads or something. I don't know. Okay.
It's fun watching you get uncomfortable. That's why nobody said anything.
You enjoyed that. Just wait. Okay. If unable to function adequately in social roles, one may have a psychological disability, a psychological impairment, or a psychological dysfunction. That's a possibility. This happens to us from time to time. Last semester I taught 9 classes. I was telling Sarah that sometimes I go home at night and I just sit in my car for like 15 minutes in a catatonic stupor.
Oh, gosh.
I know, it was horrible. Was I dysfunctional? Well, I wasn't getting out of my car. I don't know how dysfunctional that was. At least I turned it off before I sat there and tried to figure out, what the hell am I doing this for? Who made me do this? And the answer was I volunteered. As stupid as that is. Those of you who have been in the military understand what I was doing. Military people think that they're bulletproof. That's why they're in the military. If you didn't think you're bulletproof, you wouldn't do it. Go out, stand up there and let people shoot at you. My God, who does that kind of stuff? Only bulletproof people, of course. Then it turns out they're not bulletproof, and guess who gets to take care of them afterwards? Okay. They never shoot medics because they got red things all over. Yeah, right. It's a target. Psychological disability can be considered analogous to a physical disability, an application of the disease model of abnormal behavior. So it can be considered analogous to a physical disability. We can look at it as a physical disability. Sometimes it turns out to be a physical disability. You're non-functional. You can't do this anymore. So sometimes a psychological problem turns into a physical problem, like me. Maybe I did have a problem last semester, obviously. I was sitting in my car, not being able to move. Sometimes, and this is a family thing. My son used to play soccer, and he would never have his shoes on. and we would you'd go out to the car to go to the soccer game, and we'd say, Chris, put on your shoes, put on your shoes. First, before you put on your shoes, you have to put on your socks. Then in soccer, you have to put on your shin guards, right? So there's 3 things he had to put on. Guess what he had on by the time we got to the field? Nothing. He just had his shorts and his shirt on. He didn't have his shoes on. So then it would take him another 15 minutes to put his shoes on. And if we got there just before the game started, he didn't have his shoes, socks and shoes on by the time the game started. So you have to stand on the sideline and wait for them to put him in. He was really good, so usually they put him in as soon as he put his shoes on. He's so slow. Okay, but I have the same problem. Sometimes I'll sit there waiting to put my socks on. It'll take me 5 minutes to decide to go ahead and pull those damn socks on. And then I put my shoes on. It takes another 5 minutes to put my shoes on. I don't know why. It's a shoe thing, and it has to do with Bradways. I have no idea what's going on. Does anybody else have that problem with their shoes and socks? I hate them. I didn't learn to tie my shoes until I was in the 2nd grade. You know, everybody hated me in the 1st grade because I had to tie my shoes. Not all individuals who display symptoms of abnormal behavior experience difficulties in their social functions, eating disorders, for example. These individuals tend to be fairly socially inept or socially apt. They can function in society. This is not a problem for them. But they still have an eating disorder. A lot of individuals who are very, very popular are very, very skinny because they vomit all the time. So it doesn't mean that they're non-functional. But of course, bulimia is not a normal activity. This is not something that people should do. When do you vomit? When you're sick, of course. So are these people sick? Well, yeah, they're sick because they're forcing themselves to vomit. Not the smartest thing in the world to do. If you eat something that's poison, go ahead and vomit. It's okay. We're not gonna treat you for bulimia if you vomit up that supper that your wife just made you. My wife made me she took Brussels sprouts and she mixed them in these horrible chemicals, spices. Okay, they were really strange spices, and I ate them, and they just ate a hole in my stomach. So in order to get rid of them, I had to stick my finger down my throat and vomit, which isn't the easiest thing in the world. I don't like vomiting. That's why I don't drink. Okay. I vomited every time I drink. Every damn time I drink. I know, there's something wrong with me. Psychological disability is as a continuum along which people vary. Most fall in the middle range with only mild to moderate handicaps. Any separation of normal from abnormal is arbitrary. And this is the problem. So in this area, of course, your psychologists are probably going to see things a little bit different than they see in New York. Once upon a time in a land far, far away, Omaha, Nebraska, at a Catholic high school in Omaha, they had a cluster of suicides. And they were kids. The first person that committed suicide was the captain of the football team. And then the head cheerleader committed suicide. And they thought, oh, she was in love with him. Well, it turned out that she didn't even know it, because she was head cheerleader of wrestling, not of football. She didn't have anything to do with this guy. They didn't have any classes together. They weren't dating. They didn't even know each other. So all of a sudden, they had more and more suicides. Eventually, they had 7 that were successful. They had 15 attempts that were unsuccessful. So everybody's up in arms. These people are Catholics. Catholics cannot be buried in sanctified ground if they commit suicide. And this was a Catholic high school. People were just going crazy. So what they did, they decided that they would have an intervention. And a group from New York City, a group of psychiatrists from New York City volunteered to come out for research purposes to see what was going on and see if they could help out with the people in Omaha. Well, I don't know if you've ever been to Omaha, but it ain't anything like New York City. The mindset is completely different. The lifestyle is completely different. And when these psychiatrists and psychologists came in, one of the things that happened was that they couldn't communicate with these kids. These were teenagers. These were high school kids. They were talking to them about Things that were important in New York City, which isn't important in Omaha. Most of the kids in Omaha were actually farmers that came into Omaha to go to school. And of course, these were people from New York City that had never seen a cow in their life. So they couldn't communicate with each other. Not only that, but their perspective was completely skewed. They finally cured themselves just to get rid of those guys from New York City, to make those idiots go away because they weren't doing any good. So normal and abnormal is arbitrary. And what is normal in New York City is maybe abnormal in Omaha. And of course, to somebody from New York City, the people in Omaha, for one thing, what the hell are they doing in Omaha? This place smells like cows. Why would anybody live in Omaha? They had stockyards. They did back then. They don't anymore. They closed down all the stockyards. But, somebody from New York City has no clue. I don't smell any exhaust from all the automobiles. This is terrible. The place is all spread out. Well, sure, it's Omaha, Nebraska. Of course it's spread out. New York is all built straight up. So they didn't understand each other. And of course, because of that, the whole concept of normal and abnormal was completely skewed between the professionals and between the kids. And of course, the community got rid of these guys, and then they moved in. They moved in people from the area, people from Lincoln, people from Kansas City came up. So they have stockyards in Kansas City too, so that was one of the reasons. Anyway, just a quick story, normal and abnormal. Individuals with good mental health tend to share several attributes. They effectively function and find satisfaction in life. They enjoy themselves. They are happy. If there's one thing I could give everybody, if I could give everybody a gift, it would be happiness. I'd give you the gift of happiness. Because if you're happy, then you don't have to worry about anything else. Then you are happy with whatever's happening to you. And you won't react negatively. You won't find it necessary to cope with unhappiness, with sadness. Depression causes a lot of people to do things, to try to dissipate their sadness. How do they do that? They smoke cigarettes, they smoke pot, they drink alcohol, they shoot up with heroin, which is the dumbest thing in the world, because it's like death, okay? You inject yourself with heroin and it feels like you died. But all your problems go away. How perfect is that, if all your problems go away? Anyway, if there were a gift I could give you, it would be the gift of happiness. As you can tell, I'm really happy. I really enjoy doing what I'm doing. I really love this, and I really love my wife. So there you go. Those are two things that make me happy. My grandson is the coolest kid in the whole wide world. That's three things that make me happy. There you go. So what in the world do I have to be unhappy about? My dogs followed me to school today. It's not the worst thing that's ever happened. I'm deathly afraid they're going to get hit by a car. Or somebody's going to steal them. They're such cute little dogs. And they like me for some ungodly reason. They have lasting and emotionally gratifying relations. In other words, they have relationships with people that make them feel good. So they're happy with their situation. I've been married 3 times, and I wasn't happy with my situation the first time. You all know the story of my wife stabbing me. As painful as that, well, it wasn't even that painful. It woke me up, though, I'll tell you what, it sure woke me up. If you stab somebody when they're asleep, that means you really want to kill them, doesn't it?
Or you want them to learn.
I shouldn't have fallen asleep while she was arguing with me. Obviously, I wasn't arguing back. I fell asleep. Even my current wife complains that I don't argue very well. I'm not a very good arguer. So, I know. There's something wrong with me. Anyway, gratifying relations. So the social aspect is extremely important to being normal. So you need to be happy and you need to appreciate your relationships. They are more likely to make a realistic appraisal of their talents and shortcomings. In other words, they don't see themselves as better than they actually are, and they don't see themselves as worse than they really are. problem with depression, a lot of times the captain of the football team, why in the world would this guy on top of the world, he's the captain of the football team, why in the world would he kill himself? Because he didn't see himself as, he didn't see that as a positive. Sometimes people have abilities and they ignore them. They don't see it as a positive, so they don't try to develop their positiveness. My son was a really fast runner. I was a really fast runner, and he was faster than I was. Damn it. But he was also a really good wrestler. He started lifting weights when he was 12, so by the time he was in high school, he looked like he had 2% body fat. He was really in good shape. And he could beat just about anybody. But because it was a natural talent, and because he didn't have to do anything for it, he didn't appreciate it. So he only wrestled for 1 year. Yeah.
Would you maybe say it's an inability to adjust your perception?
Right. Right. So brilliant people. I just read a book over the holiday about two psychologists, and one of them thought that he was the dumbest person in the world, and the other guy had an ego that was beyond anything you can imagine. And the two of them got together, they collaborated, and they're the ones that came up with social psychology. They're the ones that came up with a lot of different psychological aspects. But one of them, he was constantly questioning himself, despite the fact he had all these brilliant ideas. So yeah, sometimes you just can't see past your own negativity. Sometimes you're just too negative. And there are people like that. There are people that just don't see the positive in things. They only read negative things. So they can't accept anything positive about themselves. There are some attractive people that don't think they're pretty. There are some ugly people that don't think that they think they are pretty. That's really confusing. But I'd rather be an ugly person that thought I was pretty than a pretty person that didn't realize I was pretty. You know, delusion is, sometimes it's a good thing. What happened in the football game? What was the score of the football game yesterday? Eagles won and the Patriots won, right? Was it a walkover? Did Brady play? They said that he might not play. He obviously played and kicked everybody's butt, right? Yeah. Okay, just a thought. Now sometimes, and this happened to me when I was a freshman. When I was a freshman in college, I was running track, and I'd never run against college kids before, so I didn't know how slow I was. So when I went out to run, I didn't realize that kid from Notre Dame was supposed to beat me, or that kid from Indiana University was supposed to beat me. So I'd go out and I'd just bust my tail trying to beat that kid. And sometimes I did. I actually beat those guys. But I wasn't smart enough to understand that I wasn't supposed to beat somebody from Purdue, or somebody from IU, or somebody from Ball State, or the world record holder in the 400 intermediate hurdles. I didn't realize that this guy was supposed to kick my ass. So I ran as fast as I could. And sometimes I actually won because I was ignorant of the fact that how bad I was. And sometimes it's a good thing to not recognize your shortcomings. Sometimes it's a good thing. Basketball players, freshman basketball players, well, they've never played against Duke before. They've never played against UNC. They don't know that they're supposed to roll over and play dead. So they go out there and they try. And they actually beat these guys. And sometimes it's a good thing. Realistic appraisals. Good mental health tends to leave a person open to alternative ways of behaving. Cope. You're able to cope. You're able to adjust. You're able to adapt. I can remember going from the United States to a combat zone, and I was able to adjust. The hardest part was the fact that it was so hot. Oh my God. It was so humid. talking about obviously a different place than the desert. Okay. But I was able to adapt. I was able to behave properly in that situation. Many terms have been used to refer to abnormal behavior, psychopathology, mental illness, behavior disorder, emotional disturbance. Unfortunately, there is a tendency for terms referring to abnormal behavior to acquire a derogatory meaning. A perfect example is the term retarded. Once upon a time in the United States, it wasn't that long ago, about 5 years ago, that was the psychological term we used for someone with an intellectual deficit. We refer to them as retarded. It's in the DSM-4. It's in the DSM-3. It's in the DSM-4-TR. So this was the medical term that we used for someone with a psychological deficit, with a intellectual deficit. We don't use that term anymore. We're going to talk about that in just a second. And the reason we don't use it anymore is because it acquired a derogatory connotation. So when somebody used the term retarded, all of a sudden it became common lexicon all over the United States, all over the world, to use the term retarded, and you could tease your friends about being retarded. And so you'd point at them and refer to them as being retarded. Well, once upon a time, there were medical terms like moron and idiot and imbecile. These were medical terms, and then it became common to refer to people in these terms. As a matter of fact, when my dogs followed me this morning, I said, "Look, those two idiots are following me." As I normally refer to them as the two idiots. And actually, probably shouldn't do that, even though it's just in my head. Maybe I shouldn't use that term. But they are my dogs, and I think I pet them. I don't not pet them because they're idiots. That's not the way it works. So there is a tendency for medical, or actually psychological terms to become derogatory. It is far easier to label mental disorders than explain and understand mental disorders. It's a lot easier to talk about somebody with borderline or bipolar disorder or schizophrenia than to understand where it comes from, what's going on, unfortunately. At the turn of the 20th century, hospitals were set up to house individuals with intellectual deficits. These houses were called schools for the feeble-minded. We don't refer to these schools as schools for the feeble-minded anymore. Well, most people don't use the term feeble-minded. This is the New Jersey home for feeble-minded women. There you go. How insulting is that? Well, it's insulting now, but at the time it wasn't insulting at all. It was a medical term. From this concept of feeble-minded came categorization with its own terms. Moron, of course, was used to mean someone with borderline intellectual capabilities. This was at the turn of the 20th century. It's only 100 years ago, 115 years ago. We referred to somebody as a moron. If they were a moron, it meant that they were not real smart, but not real dumb at the same time. An imbecile was a term for someone with a moderate intellectual disability. And an idiot was reserved for people with the most severe intellectual incapacity. Of course, that's what I call my dogs. And now I'm apologizing to my dogs. Like they care what I call them, right? They don't speak English, do they? If I called them an idiot and I say it in a nice voice, they could be honey bun or something like that as far as they're concerned. They don't speak English, not that I'm aware of. In 1961, all the other terms were jettisoned by the medical community for the neutral term mental retardation. So for 70 years, we referred to people as idiots, morons, and imbeciles. And then we changed it to mental retardation. They're mentally retarded. It was really tough when the DSM-5 came out for psychology professors to change their terminology. I had a colleague that for 2 years would not use the term intellectual deficit. He still called it mental retardation, and he swore that he wasn't going to change. So we fired him because he wouldn't change. Things changed. Well, I didn't have anything to do with firing him, but he got fired. 1968 it was incorporated into the mental health lexicon in the DSM-2. Remember, the DSM-2 also felt that homosexuality was a mental illness. It wasn't until the DSM-3 that we changed all that. But in 1968, we actually adopted it. It took 7 years to adopt it into the psychological lexicon, and we didn't do that for 7 more years. 2010, President Obama signed a law purging the term mental retardation from all government documents. Once upon a time, it was a medical term, but we purged it from all government documents. The ones that we purged were the ones that were digital. You can do that. You can find mental retardation, you can type that in, and you can find it, and you can replace it with intellectual deficit. You can do that. But if it's a paper copy, there's nothing you can do about it, because you can't destroy paper copies, and you certainly can't scratch things out. Otherwise, it looks like, the federal government is trying to hide things from people. In 2013, the mental health community changed its lexicon to intellectually disabled with the DSM-5, of course. So once again, it took the psychological community a little bit of time to change things, even though President Obama had changed the terminology. Of this 1,660 individuals living on Manhattan's East Side who they did research on, the individuals placed in the following categories of degree of impairment. This is in 1962. So this was in New York City. It's in New York City in Manhattan in 1962. They looked at 1,660 people, and what they discovered that only 18.5% of them were normal, were well. 36.3% had mild problems, mild psychological problems. 21.8% were moderate. 13.2% were marked. 7.5% were severe, and 2.7% were completely incapacitated by their mental illnesses. I know where your feet are. Okay. I'm okay.
What do they mean by market?
Marked, that means it's, yeah, it's a good question. Okay, so you've got mild problems, you've got moderate problems, you've got marked problems, and severe problems. Yeah, I know. What's the difference between severe and marked? I don't know. Okay, but they're just giving it 4 different categories. Okay. Of problems. So marked is the next thing you say after moderate, I guess. I didn't do the research, okay? I don't know what. I have no idea. Scientists and researchers are able to advance science by looking at information and speculating on how and why select things take place. From these observations, the researcher will develop an idea about why select things take place. We're talking about what Sarah taught you in research methods. Those of you who have had research methods. If you haven't, this is a scientific method. The first thing you do is realize that there's a problem, and you need to do research on it. Then you come up with a hypothesis. You come up with an idea as to what's going on. You come up with a hypothesis. Now you need to test your hypothesis. So you started with an idea. Oh, wait a minute. We have, this is one of the things that happened on the Fort Belknap Reservation. We had a cluster of people with lupus erythematosus. With lupus. You've heard of lupus. Lupus just means wolf. But what happened was, it's an internal problem. We had a whole cluster of them. So what we needed to do, we needed to do research to find out where all this lupus was coming from. Was it genetic? Is it coming from the cyanide in the water because they did cyanide leaching in the gold mines just north of the place? And it's running down into the creeks? Is that what's going on? So we needed to do research. But they should do research to find out. So the hypothesis was it was being caused by the cyanide. The researcher will then develop and conduct an experiment on the select thing and accumulate data. Now this is really kind of tough because we're talking about medical data here. We're talking about IHS. We're talking about the federal government allowing you to do the research. And that's a problem because the feds, if we find out that something's wrong, then guess who has to pay? Yeah, exactly. The feds have to. So a lot of times they won't let you do research. From the data, the researcher will determine if his hypothesis is correct or incorrect. And of course, that this research hasn't been done yet, despite this cluster of lupus. Most of you probably have never even heard of lupus. I'm sure you probably have never seen anybody with lupus. And here we have a reservation with 1,700 people, and they have 15 cases of lupus. Obviously, there's a reason. Genetics? That's a possibility. Could it be the cyanide? Maybe, I don't know, maybe it's child abuse. Yeah, that's it, it's child abuse. Anyway, after the hypothesis has been reconfigured to fit the existing data, the researcher may develop a theory about select things. And of course, from this we can say, if we've discovered that the cyanide leaching from the gold mines has caused a problem, then our theory may be that cyanide, we should keep cyanide away from the water supply because potentially it can contaminate it, and the people may come down with such problems as lupus erythematosus. Okay, that's the way it works. Of course, I used that example. We could use the uranium mines here. Are the uranium mines causing any problems that we know about? What kind of problems? Cancers? Radiate from the radiation?
I think in Tuba City they did a study in the 80s because they had some towns, uranium towns, leftovers from the
Oh,
rain.
Sure.
And the rain, the water got into the water, got down into the water table.
Right.
And it's contaminated the drinking supply. And they had the highest, or the birth defect rate was higher than the national average.
Oh.
It spiked up.
Right. Now, usually we don't care if old people die, or we don't even care if adults die, but if it's affecting the babies, then a lot of times we have problems with that. It's easy to get people to get upset about babies having problems. So we have determined that it's caused by the uranium tailings. Yeah, the water leaching through and getting into the water table. Okay, interesting. Interesting, but how in the world did they discover that? Well, they had to look at what was going on. They needed to measure the amount of radiation in the water table, and they needed to look at a number of years of birth defects. That's what they had to do. It's not like you can stop it right away. Well, sometimes you can. The Japanese did. The Japanese were, they had lumber mills, and they were right on the bay. And they were using lead to process the wood somehow. That's what they were using, lead. So the lead was getting into the bay, and the lead in the water was causing cancer in the fish. And then they were catching the fish and they were eating the fish. If the woman was pregnant, when she ate a contaminated fish, then their children would have birth defects, and they were neurological problems. Really serious. But they stopped that right away, but that's the Japanese government, it's not the federal government. Because in the federal government, what's the most important thing? Yeah. Isn't that tragic? So I guess they stopped the government shutdown. Didn't stop today, they voted.
They're voting.
Oh, they're voting right now, it hasn't stopped yet?
It stopped, but it might be up and running by tonight.
3 days. Okay. How much did that cost us? Was it $900,000 or something? $900 million. I'm sorry, $900 million. I know. My wife is retired military, so she's got a check that's not coming. Oh my God, what are we going to do next? I won't be able to buy earrings anymore. People come to my office and sell me earrings. I don't wear earrings. Why in the world am I buying these things? I'm in trouble. What are we doing? Okay, so we've taken care of this problem. Problems with research. In developmental science, there are a few people who are very much alike, and this is a problem. If we did research in this room, everybody is similar. You're all from here. That makes you similar, except for me, of course. I'm an outlier. I would be an outlier. Most of you are about the same age, kind of, almost, just about. Once again, I'm the outlier. I'm an old fart. You guys are all puppies, just young children Okay, so I'm the outlier. We have males and females. There you go. We have males and females. But how, so if we did research, would we get exactly the same results from everybody in the room? Probably not. Because the reality is that despite the fact that you're all from the same reservation, you probably all have different ideas. So if we were doing social research, those of us who have been in the military, we may think one way, and people who have never been in the military probably think it totally differently. So there you go. And maybe the people in the military are right. Or maybe they're wrong. That would be a tragedy. Okay. Even the behavior of one individual may not be the same in more than one circumstance, so we can put you in different circumstances and we won't get the same result. That's one of the things that I was talking about, those two individuals who collaborated. That's one of the things that they discovered. That people don't always make the same decisions over and over and over again. Just because normally you vote conservative, in the next election you may vote liberal. And people will predict, well, if this is somebody from the reservation, they always vote conservative. Actually, it's the other way around. But in this election, they're going to vote liberal. But of course, they're trying to pretend that everybody always does exactly the same thing. If I go to the grocery store to buy something to drink, what am I going to buy? Well, I never buy water. I hate the taste of water, so I never buy water. But this time, I may buy water, even though I never buy water. And those researchers will go, that's an outlier. He wasn't supposed to do that. So sometimes we don't do the same thing that what we're supposed to do, what we normally do. I talked to my wife on the telephone today. Usually she says, I love you, when she hangs up, but she didn't say that today. Should I be worried? We've been married for 39 years. Should I be worried? And the reason she didn't say I love you is because she was in the women's bathroom and she didn't want to say. I don't know. Does that make sense? Can't you say I love you in the bathroom? Or will everybody get real... Exactly. That's the problem. Okay. She hadn't flushed the toilet. She was waiting to flush the toilet until she hung up. I guess. I don't know.
That's what she really loves about it.
Oh, man. Life is so hard, isn't it? So you don't think she loves me anymore? It's your sad. I'll call her tonight and see if you're right. This is so tragic. Things do change over time. We do change. When I was young, of course, I was married to one lady, and then when I was a little bit older, I was married to somebody else. And now that I'm even older, I'm married to somebody else. There you go. Things do change over time. I know. When I was 22 years old, I was in the Air Force. And I stayed in the Air Force for 12 years. But things change over time. And now I'm not in the Air Force anymore. Well, obviously, I'm too old to be in the Air Force. Scientists may have blind spots. A lot of scientists do. They think that they're really damn smart. So whatever they think is correct. This is a mistake because sometimes they make mistakes. They do. Researchers will make mistakes. And they're blind to the fact that they're doing something stupid. Because they think everything that they think is correct. Professors will do exactly the same thing. You may catch me in saying something stupid that is completely incorrect. And when I do that, you guys need to correct me. Things change. I'm old. Maybe I don't recognize how important your cell phones are. Maybe they're extremely important to you. And without them, you'll start crying. Or something, because you won't be in contact with the people that you need to be in contact with. And I don't recognize, half the time I forget this. There's something wrong with me. I don't want to talk to my wife on the toilet, I guess. That's the problem. So I forget my cell phone. Research methods or the applications may be flawed, and of course this is a problem as well. You have to come up with a good research method in order to make it right. And one of the things that we have done, those of you who have done article critiques, potentially you found research that was crap. I mean, that was incorrect. That's what I meant. I didn't mean crap. It happens all the time. Or maybe they made a broad generalization about American Indians and they tested 18 American Indians in Connecticut. Well, how many Connecticut Indians are there? There's thousands of them. Do they represent the people in the Southwest? Do they represent the Native Americans that live in the Northeast? The Northwest, or on the Northern Plains? The people in Connecticut? If I do research about people on the Northern Plains, can I say that American Indians in the Southwest are going to be doing the same thing? Can I go to Oklahoma and do research on American Indians in Oklahoma and say that the people in the Southwest are the same? Can I? I can't, can I? All right. But I'll try. Because I want everybody to read it. I want them to print it in an important magazine. And then, you know, Nature writes my article up, and then they make me look really smart. And then I get tenure. Once again, it has to do with money. You know, this is terrible. So I may lie just in order to get a job at Harvard. People, what's wrong with them? Scientific study of abnormal behavior. One of the types of studies that we do in psychology is the case study. Epidemiological research is another one. Correlational research, where we compare two pieces of research, and experimental research is the last type. Epidemiological research is the study of the incidence or prevalence of a disorder in a population. It's also referred to as normative research. Remember I was talking about lupus erythematosus? Lupus erythematosus is not that common, but here we have a cluster of them in one place. That would be epidemiological research. When they were looking at the birth defects in Tuba City, epidemiological research. So they needed to come in, they needed to control what was happening, they needed to look at the past, so that they could accumulate all the proof that the tailings from the uranium mining were causing problems. They needed to prove that the uranium, or the radiation at least, something was getting into the water table. They had to prove that. And that's known as epidemiological research. Data collected through this method can provide important information about public health trends and risks across different elements of the population. But there are times when people don't want this to happen. Suicide, for example. A lot of people don't want to admit that suicide is taking place. That was one of the problems in Omaha. It is this class I was talking about Omaha, right? Or was it the last class? It's this class, wasn't it? Right, can't remember. Okay, that's one of the problems in Omaha. It took them days to figure out that they had a cluster of suicides. And the only reason that they admitted it, remember these are Catholics, and they can't bury that kid if he commits suicide. They can't bury him in the cemetery. They have to take him to another cemetery. They can't bury him in sacred ground. So it took them about 5 days before they started to admit it. By that time, they already had 7 attempts, and they had 3 completed suicides before they admitted that they had a problem. This is something that a lot of people don't want to talk about. They don't want to admit that they were a suicide. Tom Petty died, a couple of weeks ago. Now they found out that it was a fentanyl overdose. And his family is saying it was an accidental overdose because he was in so much pain that he had a patch on one arm and he was taking fentanyl orally and he killed himself. It's an opiate. Opiates sometimes will sneak up on you and you get more than you think you got. Was it really an accidental overdose, or did he just overdose on fentanyl? That's the question. His family says it was accidental. As soon as I read that, I went, yeah, right, okay. He took 3 times as much as he was supposed to take. He had it in a patch, and he took 2 pills when he should have taken 1. If he'd taken 1 pill, he'd still be alive, but he took 2 pills. How accidental is that? That's the question. What was going on in his mind when he actually committed suicide? I'm sorry, when he actually died. I'm sorry. Okay, that's my own personal opinion. I think he committed suicide because he was in so much pain. Happens. Robin Williams, he accidentally strangled himself to death with a belt. No, you can't. Accidentally strangled yourself to death? Okay. Why did Robin Williams commit suicide? Does anybody know?
He was depressed.
He was depressed, but what had just happened?
His friend died or something.
Did he lose his son?
No, actually what happened was he had just been diagnosed with rapid onset Alzheimer's disease. Yeah. And he had a history of cocaine use. And he'd fallen off the wagon, I don't know, 6 months before. And he had just come back from rehab and committed suicide. But he was diagnosed with rapid onset Alzheimer's disease. Probably meant to do it. He tied a belt to the door and strangled himself. He leaned over until he passed out. And then he was gone. Why am I talking about this stuff? Data collected through this method can provide information about public health trends and risks from different elements of the population, and of course that's a good thing. Right now we need to figure out what's going on with all these opiates. Why are people taking so many opiates? Why are they overdosing on opiates? What the hell's going on? Can we control this? We also need to figure out what's going on with marijuana. We need to figure out if it's really if it's not as dangerous as people say that it might potentially be. That's what we need to figure out. We don't want to hurt our kids. Or do we care about our kids? Do we care about our kids? Would we give them a poison like marijuana if it's really bad? Are we so selfish that we would legalize something that's potentially dangerous for our kids? Of course we would. It has to do with money again. Once again, it has to do with money. Random sampling, participant selection is by chance from a larger population. Important because the sample determines to what groups of people a given finding can be generalized or applied to. So if we have a population, this is a population, the Navajo Reservation. If we took a sample from the Navajo Reservation, like the kids at Dene College, there's 1,000 people here, there's what, 250,000 on the reservation, or something like that? Okay. And there's what, 1,050? So if we tested all the people at this college, we did research on all the people at this college, that would be a sampling of the Navajo Reservation. Would it be an accurate sample of the people on the Navajo Reservation?
No.
No? No? Aren't you normal? Why wouldn't it be a normal sample?
Well, the socioeconomics of students is different.
Okay.
People in school are probably a little different than people in school.
Okay.
The age as well,
Okay.
age demographics.
We're talking about 19 through whatevers? Okay. How many elders do we have in our classes here?
It's local too.
Right, it's more local here, exactly. One of the reasons why, and I haven't talked to Sarah about this, but one of the reasons that the psychology program is so popular is because we're teaching a lot of these classes online. That's why I'm filming. I don't know, business doesn't do that. You know, nobody else does that. In order to go to Dene College, you almost have to live in Saley or Lukachukai or Chinle or someplace close, right? So this is kind of a college for right around where the college is. And if you lived in Window Rock, could you take colleges at Dene College? Well, yeah, but none of them are online, so you'd have to wait until somebody wandered down there to teach you, right? I'm not going over Window Rock. I'm not going over the mountains. mean, geez, wouldn't it be horrible to go over the mountain today, over to Shiprock just to teach a psychology class? Oh my God. So one of the reasons why we're so popular is because we're making this available to everybody on the reservation. That's kind of exciting. Last semester I had a student in Japan. That was exciting. Yeah. Almost, a little bit exciting, not that exciting. Okay. So can we generalize it? Would we be able to generalize it? Well, no, it's only students. A lot of research has been done with prisoners in prisons. We don't do that anymore. But once upon a time, you need a captive audience. So they did all of this research with psychology students, psychology research with psychology students.
I want to amend my answer because I was just thinking about Freud and all the observations he made from the two ladies.
Right.
And it applied so generally to almost the whole human population.
Case study. That's a case study. Actually, he was talking about two ladies, but he had seen a lot of different ladies. So he made those two ladies representative of everybody. So yes, you're right. Okay, that's the way case studies are done. Thank you. Now I don't have to talk about case studies. That's perfect. Reliability is the extent to which a measure consistently yields the same results on repeated trials. So if I do research here, and then somebody does research at Coconino, kind of the same population, pretty much the same population, right? And then they do research at Highland, wait a minute, that's another population, isn't it? If they get the same results that I do, then maybe maybe this is true. When I did my own research, what I discovered was, I did my research on American Indians, on a group of American Indians. What I discovered was the level of trauma that they had suffered through their life didn't lower their resilience level, which we don't see in any other population. So maybe there was something wrong with my research. It's possible that what I discovered wasn't true at all. American Indians, no matter how high their trauma level, their resilience level didn't decrease. However, my research agreed with two other pieces of research. One that was done here, I did my research up on the Northern Plains, one that was done here, and one that was done at Tohono O'odham. So here we have three different populations of American Indians, and we got exactly the same results. So maybe it is true that American Indians, no matter how much trauma you've been through in your life, that your resilience level doesn't decrease. And we found that in three different studies. The question is, how many studies did we see where it wasn't true? If we look at other populations, if we look at white Americans, if we look at African Americans, if we look at Hispanic Americans, one of the things we discover is the more trauma they've been through, the lower their resilience level. But here we have three different studies of resilience, and we discovered that trauma wasn't a factor as far as American Indians were concerned, with three different populations of American Indians. No, I didn't actually look for anything that refuted my research. But I found two other pieces of research that agreed with me. And one of them was from here. Okay, so reliability. So if we can do this, if we measure the amount of trauma that you've been through in your life, and we measure your resilience, potentially we'll get the same thing. And that is reliability. Inter-observer reliability, the extent to which different observers or raters agree on the way that they categorize or in some way quantify a given observation. A good example is a rater. Let's talk about the Winter Olympics are coming up. We have the figure skaters. How in the world do you get those scores? Well, you have all of these different raters, and each one of them gives them a different score. Or maybe they give them the same score. Inter-rater reliability would be if they came up with almost the same score every time. So if somebody skates and gets a 10 or whatever, and somebody else gives them a 9 and somebody else gives them a 7, then the inter-rater reliability is really poor in that case. One guy's going, oh, it's really good. I really like her hairdo, man. Oh, skating, I forgot about the skating part. I don't know, I wasn't even watching, I was just looking at her hair. Okay, I gave her hair a 10. No, I'm just kidding. Psychological measurement is never as precise as physical measurement. Psychological measures only sample a small part of the domain of how a person acts, thinks, or feels. If you go to the emergency room and you tell them that you're depressed, they'll give you the VEX depression inventory, and you will have to rate all of these things. You'll have to give them a score. When I went into the emergency room the other day, and he wanted to know how much pain I was in, and I couldn't tell him. He said, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much pain is it? I don't know. What does a 7 feel like? You know, what is that? You know, punch me in the nose, and so that I know what a 7 feels like. You know. And the reason they wanted to know that, they wanted to know how much better the pain was getting. So they gave me a shot of Toradol, and they said, well, what's your pain level now? Well, I didn't tell them what my pain level was to begin with, so they couldn't find it. It wasn't any better. Okay. Not important. Anyway, so this is my idea, right? I may be a tough guy, and so you cut my arm off, and I'm going, it's a 5. It doesn't hurt that much. I've had worse pain than this, you know, and here I am, my arm's just hanging there. You know, or maybe I'm a real wimp. So, you know, I get a splinter under my finger, and I go, it's a 10. I got a 10. One of those kinds of things. So what's the difference? I mean, well, of course, I was supposed to be the baseline. I was supposed to give him a baseline, and I didn't. Psychological measures, though, I mean, we're talking about depression here. We're talking about how you react to depression. So psychological measures, it's not like mathematics, okay? But we do put mathematics into our work. Validity is a measure. A measure is valid if it measures what it's supposed to measure. So if I'm talking about depression, and I come up with a depression scale, I have to prove that depression scale is accurate. It's valid. So I can't use, in my research, I can't use a scale that's not valid. So I will have to compare my scale to another scale that is widely accepted. So if I come up with my own depression inventory, we would compare it with Beck's depression inventory. How accurate is my depression inventory? And I would have to compare it with Beck's depression inventory. It's what we had to do with resilience. We had a resilience scale. Well, what the hell is resilience? And how in the world do you measure it? Well, there was a scale that was developed by a nurse in Spokane, Washington. She came up with a scale, and then she tested people all over the world. How in the world? We can't even define resilience. How in the world do we measure resilience? How did we do that? Well, we measured all these other people. How happy are you? You know, on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy are you? That kind of thing. And of course, we came up with a scale, and it was relatively valid. It had been standardized all over the world. And that's what I used. I used that same scale. How accurate was it? I don't know. What's the definition of resilience? Difficult to determine in psychology. As much of what is of interest are constructs. They're hypothetical or theoretical concepts that cannot be measured directly, like aggression. How much aggression is too much aggression? You watched the football game yesterday. How much was that aggression, or was that sportsmanship, or being an athlete? You know, somebody hits somebody, we can't hit them in the head anymore. You know, supposed to. It's called spearing. So aggression. How in the world do we measure that? You know, you've got a guy that comes into the emergency room and he's just beaten up somebody, and now he's complaining that his knuckles hurt. Okay, so was that aggression, or was that he was defending himself? It's not him, it was the other guy. It's always the other guy. How many beers did you have? I only had a couple. How many is a couple? As it turns out, it could be a 6-pack, could be a 12-pack. Probably 18 beers. It's just a couple, though. Well, they were only drinking 2 at a time, so that's right. They come in, they can't walk. And you've seen them before. You know they've had a lot of alcohol because they're not moving very well, and they only had a couple. And they're always beers. They always had beers. Usually the beer's the chaser. They had vodka or tequila, or they were drinking something else. Aggression, anxiety, how in the world do you measure anxiety? Intelligence, how do we measure intelligence? Can I ask you a question to determine your intelligence? You see these things on the internet all the time. I hope you take the test, they're a lot of fun. Do they really tell you what your intelligence level is? I took an intelligence level, let's see, what did it say? Only people with an IQ over 150 can get any of these questions right. That's what it said. They were easy. I got them all right. Am I really that brilliant? No, hell no. They were so easy. It was ridiculous. You can say anything. Intelligence level. So, that doesn't mean anything. A measure can be reliable and yet not valid. In other words, it's not measuring what it's supposed to measure. They had a problem with pilots' tests. They gave them an essay that they had to write. Well, how valid is that? You have to be a good writer to be a pilot? What does writing have to do with being a pilot? Nothing. It wasn't a valid test. They took it away. It wasn't valid. Flying airplanes has nothing to do with writing. You could be dyslexic and be a great pilot. It's possible. Correlational studies look at two variables to see if there is a connection between the two. Positive correlation is when one variable increases and the other increases also. So if I said that peanut butter caused migraine headaches, if every time you ate peanut butter you had a migraine headache, that would be a positive correlation between those two variables. Peanut butter usually doesn't cause migraine headaches, however, but it would be a positive correlation in that case. A negative correlation is when one variable increases, the other decreases. So the faster I drive, the more likely I will get in an accident. The slower I drive, the less likely I will get in an accident. So when my speed increases, wait a minute, that's an increase, isn't it? Oh, man. Wait a minute. Increase, decrease. I need an increase.
Safety.
Safety? The safety decreases, right. Those are the Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I've been talking too long, I guess. Correlational research. It can tell researchers something about the strength and direction of a relationship between variables, but does not demonstrate causation. I was talking about trauma before. When trauma increases, it doesn't affect resilience as far as American Indians are concerned. Now, normally when one increases, the other one increases. We look at the white population, that's what we see. We look at the African American population, that's what we see. So what we're doing is we're just comparing these two variables. We're trying to find out if one has anything to do with the other. And when it comes to trauma, it has nothing to do with resilience among American Indians, at least in the 3 studies that I read. Because of the lack of experimental control over the variables measured, there can be an unknown number of other variables that might contribute to any observed relationship. And we see this all the time. A lot of times you'll read research and you'll go, what? They didn't even think about how old these people were. They did it on college kids, and they wanted to find out what they thought about something that was going to happen in the future. If we talk to older people, they would say one thing. If we talk to teenagers, they go, I'll Google it. Wait a minute. I'll figure it out. You can Google everything. These are scatter plots, and those of you who have had Sarah's research methods, you understand that scatter plots are extremely important. This is 100% correlation. It's right in line. It goes in the right direction. So every time something increases, something else increases. This is the other way. This is a totally negative correlation, 100%. Every time one thing increases, the other one decreases. It's a negative correlation. It goes the other direction. This means that there's no correlation at all. So it's a 0 correlation. Okay. And this is 0.57. It's positive, but it's not positive enough. This is a negative 0.38. It's negative, but it's not negative enough to mean anything. So if we did a scatter plot and we got this result or this result, there would be still no correlation between the two variables. that make any sense? I hope it does. Okay, correlational studies. We have to do scatter plots in order to figure them out. Experimental research is a research method in which conditions are manipulated in order to test the effects of the manipulations on various measures. The essence of the psychological experiment is that people to be studied are randomly assigned to 2 or more groups. Experimental group is the group in which the manipulation of interest is performed. And the control group is one that is very similar to the experimental group, but we are not manipulating the variable. And that's the difference between a control and an experimental group. And that's how we do research. Some of it's good and some of it's not so good. Significant differences is something that we're looking for in psychological research. We're looking for a significant difference. When I did my research, I was looking at 5 different factors of resilience. I was trying to determine what was the most important thing about resilience. Did age have anything to do with resilience? Did gender have anything to do with resilience? Did educational level have anything to do with resilience? Did culture have anything to do with resilience? Did trauma have anything to do with resilience? And what I discovered was that age had nothing to do with resilience. I found out that gender had nothing to do with resilience. Much to my chagrin, education had nothing to do with resilience. That broke my heart. I wanted to prove that I could make somebody resilient by teaching them things. And what I discovered, I didn't discover that that was true. I was looking for a significant difference. There was only one factor that was significant, and that was culture. The stronger their culture, the stronger their resilience. So the more they adhered to their traditional culture, the more resilient they were. And I knew all these people, and I realized that the guys that went to the powwows, they were the ones that were the more resilient. Because up north, that's very important. That's how you claim your position in the tribe, is by going to the powwows. And the more you went to powwows, the stronger your resilience. As interesting as that is, it's not the same way down here, I would imagine, because powwows aren't that popular, but they're very popular up there. People will go on the powwow trail. They'll powwow all summer long and have a great time. We won't talk about 49ing. I hope you don't know what that means. It's the party after the powwow. I've never been to one. I understand they're a lot of fun. People tell me they're a lot of fun. Like 5 days afterwards, they're coming home from the 49. Did you have a good time? Oh man, did I ever have a good time. I believe everything I'm told. Did you know what 49 is?
Yeah.
Okay. Have you ever been to one of those things? Okay. Are they fun, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Love songs.
Okay.
Created, yeah.
Big fire. I don't know. Okay. Does everybody else know what 49ing was? Nobody else? Okay, good. Don't even think about it. Forget that term.
Now you got it stuck in our
It doesn't exist anymore. Just forget it. And don't ask anybody about it. They might punch you.
Excerpt paper.
Research.
Research paper.
You have to have a powwow first. Okay. Okay, in psychological studies. Excuse me.
Make it.
In psychological studies, the probability of chance finding 5 out of 100 times, where p equals 0.5 or lower, is accepted as a significant difference. So if we can discover this, and it's all statistics, this has to do with Sarah and her statistics, and now Dr. Wolf and her statistics. Thank God I don't have to do statistics or teach statistics. How boring. We're having a good time here, right? A placebo effect occurs when an exception Expectation of improvement is sufficient to cause improvement. This effect is particularly relevant for pharmacological studies. One of the things that we do in pharmacology is sometimes they give you a pill that's not supposed to really fix you. But lo and behold, it fixes you. So over the holidays, I had a pain in my right side, lower right quadrant. That's an appendicitis. I cut out many of an appendix because of the pain in the lower right side. So I went into the doctor, afraid that, of course, and this was right before I was supposed to come back here. And I was afraid that if I didn't have the surgery on that day, things would get worse. And if it got worse, then I wouldn't be able to come up here, or down here. I'm sorry, I was up there and now I'm down here. That's what I was afraid of. So I went into the doctor and he goes, it looks like an appendicitis. So they took me in and gave me a CAT scan, and what they discovered was my appendix is not there hardly at all. It wasn't an appendicitis. As soon as he told me it was not an appendicitis, guess what happened next? It stopped hurting. It hurt. But as soon as I found out it wasn't an appendicitis, that it was probably just a bruise from those damn dogs, those idiot dogs of mine, once I found that out, it stopped hurting as much. The placebo effect. As long as I knew it wasn't an appendicitis, I didn't really care about the pain. And because I didn't care about the pain wasn't nearly as severe as it was before. There you go. He fixed me by telling me it wasn't an appendicitis. The placebo effect. Sometimes you can talk people into things. We used to do this in medicine. They used to hate me because sometimes I'd go in and talk to their patients, and sometimes I'd talk them out of the problem that they were supposed to have. Sometimes you can talk people out of pain. And I used to do that when I was a laboratory technician. I'd go in to draw somebody's blood, they're in all this pain. All I would do would be to distract them. And their pain would go away. Because if you don't think about it, it doesn't hurt as much. Just like me and my appendicitis. That's the way it works. The placebo effect. It's very, very real. So why in the world did the pain go away? There's something physiological that happens.
Stress went down.
The stress went down. So maybe I'm tightening up all my muscles and it's making it hurt more.
You're releasing hormones.
And as soon as I relaxed, the pain went away. Happens all the time. We also have a natural painkiller in our brains called endorphins. If we can pump those endorphins into the area, the pain will go away. There's actually 3 of them. Endorphin, dynorphin, and ephedrine. There's 3 of them.
What about dopamine?
I'm sorry?
What about dopamine?
Dopamine makes you happy, but it doesn't take the pain away. It's those 3 neurotransmitters. It just makes you feel good about it.
Gives you perception.
Increase the dopamine level. Yes, increase their serotonin level. We can make you happy by increasing that. A double-blind design, when I was working in medicine, a double-blind design is an experimental design in which both participants and researchers do not know whether a participant is in the experimental or the control group. When I was working in medicine, I worked for a doctor who did research with otitis media. Otitis media is an inner ear infection. It's not an inner ear infection, it's a middle ear infection. Okay. So he would do all these experiments with these kids that would come in, and he would say, do you want to be part of the experiment? I'll give you this medication. I don't know if it's the antibiotic or the placebo, but we'll do this. And he gave the patients, these little kids and their parents, he gave them $100. And it's all about the money. So is the pain going to go away? Well, usually the pain went away anyway. But he was part of a double-blind study, so he didn't know if he's giving them the good stuff or the not good stuff. And that was a double-blind study. He didn't have a clue, except he cheated, and he did know, because he wanted to get paid by the pharmaceutical company. So he padded his results. That's not the right thing to do. I wasn't part of it, and anything to do with it, but it all has to do with money. Because if he didn't If he didn't get the results they wanted, they wouldn't come back to him and ask him to do more research for them. So he always made sure that his results came out the right way, which was cheating. And probably that's why your kids have middle ear infection. A single subject experimental design is an experimental method that does not rely on groups of participants, but rather uses repeated measures from individual people. In other words, they become their own baseline. They create their own baseline. So we're not looking at two different people who may potentially be different. We're looking at the same person, we get their baseline, and then we do the experiment on them and compare the two results. Single subject experimental method, and that is the end of that. We don't have, oh wait a minute, what time is it? 4:17, what time do we quit?
4:20.
Oh geez, we're almost done. We only had 3 minutes, why don't I let you go early? Is that okay with everybody? And Sheldon's going, no, stay in
This
class.
is only chapter 1, right?
That's only chapter 1, yeah. I'll get to chapter